He wasn't supposed to survive. He wasn't even supposed to be there. But he came back. With more than just himself. A large German shepherd, soaked to the bone, swam through the raging floodwater. His fur was covered in mud and debris, one ear cut and bleeding. His eyes were tired but burning with something fierce, determination. And in his mouth, held gently between his jaws, was a baby boy. The child was barely a year and a half old, wearing a drenched yellow romper, shivering but alive. His tiny hand clung to a clump of wet fur as the dog pushed forward through the current. Nobody saw him go. Nobody saw what he'd done. Hours earlier, in the chaos of evacuation, his family had accidentally left him behind. The storm was moving faster than anyone expected. In the rush to escape, in the panic of flooding roads and crowded rescue trucks, Rex was forgotten. Somewhere else in the same town, another family was trying to escape too. A young mother, Alina, had been clutching her baby, Mason, as they climbed into a rescue boat. But the winds had other plans. A massive branch struck the side of the boat. It capsized. Alina screamed, reaching out, but Mason was swept away in the dark. Nobody thought he could still be alive. The current dragged Mason into the open, his small body floating in a cracked plastic basin. He was crying at first, but as the rain poured down and the night grew colder, his cries faded. That's when Rex heard him. Alone, exhausted, still searching for his own family, Rex turned toward the sound. He could have kept going. He could have waited for someone to find him. But something deeper kicked in, something that couldn't be taught. He found the baby. He nudged the basin gently, checked he was still breathing. Then carefully he gripped the edge of the basin in his mouth, and swam. He swam through collapsed fences, under power lines, past dead silence. No one was there to help. But Rex kept going. Until finally, someone saw him. Rescue teams were scanning rooftops when a flashlight caught something strange in the water. A dog. A dog dragging something behind him. They rushed forward and froze. It was a baby. Alive. Barely breathing. But alive. The moment Alina saw her son in the rescuer's arms, she collapsed. She sobbed like she would never stop. Then, through the blur of rain and tears, she saw him, the dog who had carried her baby back to life. They left him behind. But he didn't forget what it meant to save someone. Rex wasn't just a dog. He was family. To the Turners, he was the one who waited by the front door every evening at 5:30 p.m., tail thumping the floor as Dad came home from work. He was the one who nudged little Emily out of bed every morning when she tried to fake a fever to skip school. He was the silent listener, the shadow in every room, the protector of every laugh and every secret. 6 years old now, a strong, intelligent German shepherd, Rex had grown up inside this house. He knew every creaky floorboard, every backyard scent. His loyalty was woven into the walls. That week something changed in the air. It started with the news. At first it was background noise. A storm brewing somewhere out at sea. People weren't worried. Just another watch or warning. The kind they'd heard 100 times before. But then the reports grew urgent. And the voices on the TV didn't sound calm anymore. Category 4, possibly 5. Moving faster than projected. Mandatory evacuation in effect. Sirens began to wail through the streets. Neighbors knocked on each other's doors. Cars were packed. Store shelves emptied overnight. People started looking at each other with worry instead of smiles. Inside the Turner household, bags were being zipped. Phones were being charged. Water bottles and canned goods were tossed into boxes. Emily, just 9 years old, clung to Rex's neck and whispered, "Are you scared, boy?" Rex licked her face. No, he wasn't scared. But he felt the shift. The way the humans moved faster, spoke louder, smelled more anxious. Then came the morning of the evacuation. Rain was already falling. The sky was bruised and gray. Streets were pooling with water. They'd waited too long. The emergency trucks rolled in with blaring speakers. Last evacuation round. Board now. The Turners rushed to gather everything, clothes, medicine, food. Mr. Turner yelled to his wife to grab the paperwork, the passports. Emily cried because she couldn't find her favorite stuffed rabbit. The clock was racing. And in the chaos, Rex was forgotten. It wasn't neglect. It wasn't cruelty. It was panic. The back door had blown open earlier from a gust. Rex had gone out, barking at the wind, confused by the noise and flashing lights. Nobody saw him leave. By the time the family rushed to the truck, soaked, scared, gripping one another, they didn't realize he wasn't with them. It was only when the engine roared and the truck moved that Emily turned back and screamed, "Wait, where's Rex?" But the truck didn't stop. No. We forgot him. Mrs. Turner banged on the glass. Mr. Turner shouted, "We'll come back. We'll get him. As soon as it's safe." Emily sobbed into her mother's chest. Behind them, the town disappeared into sheets of gray. And Rex? He came back to the kitchen, soaked and confused, only to find silence. He barked once. Then again. No answer. He went to each room. Nothing. He waited by the door. Thunder cracked the sky open. The water began to rise. Rex waited. He didn't leave the front porch until the water reached the windows. And even then he only left because the house began to groan. The storm was pulling it apart. By the time the roof caved in, Rex was already gone. Alone. In a world that no longer looked like the one he knew. The streets were rivers now. Trees were uprooted. Cars floated like toys. Fire hydrants spewed geysers. Windows shattered. Roofs peeled off. The sky flashed constantly, a war between lightning and wind. Rex pushed forward, swimming when he had to, climbing when he could. His cut ear flapped uselessly in the wind, bleeding slowly. Still he searched. Not for safety. But for them. His family. Where had they gone? Why did they leave? He didn't know. But he knew one thing. He was going to find them. The wind howled like a living creature. It slammed against walls. Tore tree limbs like paper. Bent traffic lights until they snapped. And in the middle of it all, Rex was still searching. He paddled through floodwaters that reached halfway up homes. His fur, once golden tan and proud, was slicked down with dirty water and debris. His chest heaved with every breath. His paws pushed through things he couldn't see, broken glass, tangled wires, floating furniture. But his eyes stayed sharp. Determined. Focused. He was going to find his people. Hours passed. Maybe more. Time didn't move the same in a storm. Every direction looked the same, drowned. Roads no longer existed. Street signs were underwater. Familiar trees were ripped from their roots. Whole houses were gone, swept off their foundations and carried blocks away. Rex climbed onto a half-submerged porch and barked. Nothing. He leapt across to a floating mattress, rode it down a current like a raft, and jumped onto the roof of a minivan. Still nothing. The rain blurred everything. The world was gray. Colorless. Cold. But then he heard something. A voice. Faint. Muffled through wind and water. Help. There's still people in there. Rex perked up. He turned his head sharply toward the sound. In the distance, through the swirling sheets of rain, he saw them, boats. Rescue teams in red jackets. People in life vests calling names, banging on doors, steering toward rooftops where families had huddled. Rex let out a howl, long, loud, desperate. But the wind swallowed it whole. No one heard. He jumped from the van, swam with every ounce of strength toward the boats. But by the time he reached the alleyway, the rescue crew had turned the corner. Gone. He whimpered. Alone again. He clambered up a pile of bricks, what used to be someone's garage, and scanned the horizon. Nothing familiar. Nothing human. He was losing strength. And the current was getting faster. The hurricane had officially made landfall. The radio in the broken truck said it was now a Category 5. But Rex didn't understand categories. All he knew was that everything smelled wrong. Like gasoline and mud and blood. That every creak of wood might be a rooftop about to collapse. That every dark shape in the water could be a body, or worse. He barked again. Still no answer. He curled up on the bricks just for a second to catch his breath. His muscles ached. His ear was still bleeding. His tail was soaked and limp. But sleep wouldn't come. The storm wouldn't let it. Another crash. Somewhere close. And then, something else. A scream. No. A cry. A baby's cry. Rex shot up, ears high despite the pain. That wasn't his family. But it was someone. He jumped back into the water, heading toward the sound. Meanwhile, miles away. Alina's arms were bleeding. She didn't care. She clawed at the muddy bank where she'd just been dragged ashore, screaming, "Where is he? Where's my son? Mason." The rescue crew pulled her back. "Ma'am, please, we're still looking." "You tipped the boat," she cried, her voice hoarse. "We flipped. I had him in my arms, and then the water, he slipped, he's out there." People were shouting. Another man was on a radio, screaming coordinates. Alina didn't hear any of it. She dropped to her knees in the mud, sobbing. Her baby. Her only child. One minute he was in her lap, safe in a basin they used to float him. The next he was gone. Swept away. She had jumped after him, of course. Fought the current. Screamed. But someone had grabbed her waist and pulled her back. She didn't even know who. All she remembered was the color yellow disappearing into the gray. The baby's little romper. Light yellow. Floating. Farther and farther away. And now, silence. No one had seen him since. "I'm sorry," one of the rescuers said gently. "But the water's moving too fast. If he's out there, there's not much we—" "Don't say it," Alina whispered. And then she curled in on herself. Broken. Back with Rex. He followed the sound. Swam around a tilted school bus, past an overturned ice cream truck, through shattered fencing. And then, there it was. A plastic basin. Half filled with water. Tossed between a bush and a fallen stop sign. Inside it, barely conscious, a baby boy. Soaked to the bone. Shivering. His curls plastered to his forehead. His brown eyes half closed. Lips turning blue. Rex froze. Not his family. Not his girl. But still a child. Still, helpless. The basin tilted with every wave. The baby coughed weakly. And something in Rex's chest clicked. He didn't hesitate. He paddled closer, carefully nudging the basin to balance it. Then, ever so gently, he clamped his jaws around the edge. Not too tight, not enough to break it. Just enough to carry it. And with the baby in tow, Rex turned. And began the journey back. He didn't know where back was. He didn't know who this baby belonged to. But he knew this. This child was alive. And needed saving. And maybe, just maybe, if he brought him back, someone might finally hear him. Someone might help. Someone might remember. The rain hadn't stopped for days. The wind came in waves, whipping through the trees, rattling windows, and howling like a warning no one wanted to hear. Inside the small bungalow at the edge of town, Mason's mother had already packed everything she could. Diapers. Bottles. His little yellow romper that made him look like a sunflower in bloom. His favorite stuffed bunny, even though it was already damp from the leaks in the ceiling. She clutched Mason to her chest as the water licked at their front porch. Her husband shouted from the doorway, waving to the rescue boat that had finally pulled up. "Let's go. They're here." Mason was half asleep against her shoulder, thumb in his mouth, his curls stuck to her skin. She whispered in his ear, not even sure if he could understand. "It's going to be okay, sweetheart. Just hold on for Mama, okay?" The rescuers helped them down from the porch, feet splashing into the cold, waist-deep water. Everything smelled like gasoline and rot. A current tugged at her ankles. She held Mason tighter. The man in the rescue vest pointed to a big plastic tub floating in the boat. "You can set the baby in here so you have both hands to climb in safely. We've been doing it all day." She hesitated. It felt wrong, like setting him adrift even for a second was tempting fate. But the boat was rocking and water was rising and everyone was shouting and the wind made it impossible to think. She kissed Mason's forehead and placed him carefully into the yellow basin. He blinked up at her, dazed but calm. The tub rocked gently as it floated in the boat's center. They started moving fast. The motor roared. The boat weaved through submerged streets. Other families called from rooftops. People reached out from windows. Chaos everywhere. Mason let out a small whimper, his fingers gripping the side of the tub. His mother reached toward him instinctively, whispering, "Mama's here, baby. I'm right here." But then a wave hit the side of the boat. It wasn't big. It didn't seem dangerous. Just a sudden jolt of water from a collapsed wall nearby. But the boat tilted hard. The people screamed. One woman lost her grip and fell overboard. The boat rocked wildly. The plastic basin tipped. Slid. And before anyone could move, it slipped over the side, and into the water. "Mason!" She screamed so loud it made the rescuers flinch. She lunged, tried to dive after him, but someone grabbed her arms. The basin floated a few feet away. The baby was still inside. Crying now. Reaching out. She thrashed, trying to swim toward him, but the boat twisted again and she was pulled back. "Let me go. Let me go." But the current was faster than all of them. The yellow tub bobbed away, down the street, turning a corner, vanishing behind a capsized delivery truck. Mason was gone. Everything after that was a blur. Her screams. Someone else yelling coordinates into a radio. The thumping of boots as they moved her to another boat. The silence that followed when she realized no one had gone after him. No one even knew where he was now. Only the flood did. Only the flood did. And it kept moving. Mason floated down what used to be Maple Avenue. Past a shattered grocery store window. Past a crushed sedan with a family photo pinned behind the windshield. He didn't cry anymore. He was too cold. Too tired. His tiny hands trembled as he clutched the rim of the basin. Rain beat down on his face. Thunder cracked overhead. His brown eyes fluttered open, then shut again. The tub spun slowly in the current. Once it bumped into a floating log, then a garbage can, then a mailbox. But somehow it never flipped. Maybe the wind protected it. Maybe fate held it upright. Maybe something was watching. It floated on, turning left where the road curved, sliding past a bus stop bench, wobbling over a submerged curb. It was almost poetic, the way the yellow basin moved through the ruins of the town, untouched, a tiny island of life in a sea of devastation. But Mason wasn't aware of any of it. He was only a baby, and he was getting colder. His cries were faint now, soft, just little gasps. His skin had turned pale, lips blue. His curls stuck to the bottom of the tub, and still the flood took him farther. A toppled fence, a basketball hoop torn from its roots, a garden gnome floating face down. No one saw him. No one knew. No one except one lone figure paddling through the water miles away. A dog. A German shepherd. Drawn by something more powerful than reason. Something older than language. He didn't know the boy's name, but he knew the sound of a child in distress. The storm couldn't hide it. The wind couldn't silence it. So he followed it. Rex turned sharply toward the faint, broken cry he thought he heard. It wasn't much, but it was something. He surged forward, his powerful legs kicking through the flood. A doorframe floated past. A garden chair. A drowned squirrel. He didn't stop. Didn't hesitate. His ears tilted forward, blood still trickling from the cut on the right one. His chest heaved with each stroke. But he swam. And swam. And swam. Until he rounded a corner and spotted something yellow wobbling in the water. A basin. Inside it, a baby boy. Barely conscious. Rex paddled faster, pushing through branches and trash and pieces of someone's broken deck. When he reached the tub, he gently nudged it with his nose. The baby stirred. One eye opened. A tiny hand moved. Alive. Rex stood in the water beside the basin, letting it rest against his chest. The baby was small, light, so light that Rex knew he could carry him. If he could just keep the tub steady. If he could just stay afloat. He nosed the edge of the basin again. And then, with all the care of a mother wolf, he gently gripped the rim between his teeth and began to swim. Mason floated behind him, one tiny, shivering breath at a time. The storm roared around them. But somewhere deep beneath it all, a heartbeat carried them forward. Not just Mason's, but Rex's too. Driven not by instinct, but something deeper. A promise made without words. To protect. To save. To bring the baby home. The storm wasn't just loud now, it was deafening. The howling wind mixed with the constant drumming of rain, drowning out everything else. The world was a blur of black water and broken pieces of homes, fences, and lives. The streets that had once been filled with people and laughter were now nothing more than a chaotic sea of floating debris, twisted metal, and shattered dreams. But through it all, Rex never stopped swimming. The basin bobbed behind him like a fragile lifeline. Mason, once small and soft, had grown cold, his little body shivering with each tremble of the water. Rex could feel the weight of the child growing heavier in his mouth, but he didn't care. The current pushed against him, threatening to drag him away, but he dug his paws into the muck beneath him and pressed forward. He was getting tired. The cut on his ear had stopped bleeding but still stung with each turn of his head. His fur, soaked and heavy, clung to his body. His muscles burned with the effort, each stroke harder than the last. But Rex pushed on, his eyes fixed ahead. He didn't know how far he had come or how far he still had to go, but there was only one thing that mattered. Mason. The wind screamed past them, and Rex's body shuddered as a particularly cold gust hit him. The baby in the basin shifted, his tiny hands reaching weakly over the edge. His cries were faint, like the distant whimper of a lost puppy. But they were still there. Rex's ears flicked, trying to locate the sound. He turned his head slightly, glancing back at the basin. Mason's face was pale and his eyes were closed, his breathing shallow. Rex felt a pang of fear deep in his chest, but he ignored it. He couldn't afford to be scared. They passed a broken street light, the top of it poking out of the water like a silent sentinel. The floodwaters had swallowed everything in its path. A sedan floated nearby, its wheels half submerged. A torn mattress drifted past, the remnants of someone's home. The world was a nightmare. But Rex's focus never wavered. He swam with purpose, each powerful stroke cutting through the water. A faint cry broke through the chaos. It was different this time. A second cry. Louder. Clear. Not from the baby. Rex's heart skipped a beat as he heard the sound again. His head snapped to the side, trying to pinpoint where it came from. but the storm made it hard to tell. He could barely see more than a few feet in front of him. He knew that cry. It wasn't a cry for help. It was a cry of warning. And then Rex saw it. In the distance, rising up from the flooded streets, was a large tree, its branches hanging low over the water. Beneath the tree, a piece of debris had caught on the branches, a sharp metal pole jutting out at an angle. Rex didn't hesitate. He changed direction, paddling quickly toward the floating obstacle. The basin, which had been drifting quietly behind him, began to bump into the side of his legs, the water swirling around them. Just as Rex reached the tree, the wind picked up, making the water churn with an even fiercer intensity. The basin slammed into the sharp metal pole, tipping dangerously. The corner of the basin scraped along the edge of the debris, threatening to send the baby flying into the cold water. Rex's heart pounded in his chest as he reached the basin. With one final lunge, he grabbed the lip of the basin again, pulling it toward himself just as the basin began to tip. His teeth clamped down hard, his muscles straining as he struggled to keep the basin steady. For a moment he thought he might lose it. The force of the storm was almost too much. The current pulled at him, trying to drag both him and Mason deeper into the water. Rex's legs shook with exhaustion, but he didn't let go. Not now. Not when he was so close. Another gust of wind hit them, and the basin tilted dangerously again, but this time Rex was ready. He lunged forward, using his body to shield the tub, keeping Mason safe from the debris. The sharp metal pole scraped against his side, but he didn't flinch. His only focus was Mason. The storm raged on, but Rex refused to back down. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the sharp, freezing air softened. The storm, while still fierce, began to calm, just enough for Rex to notice the gentle flow of water ahead. The current had slowed, the surge of floodwater becoming less violent. Rex let out a strained breath. His whole body felt like it had been through a war, but he knew they weren't out of danger yet. The wind still howled and the rain never stopped, but for the first time in hours he felt like they might actually make it. He turned to face the basin again, glancing down at Mason. The baby's tiny fingers had wrapped around the edge of the tub, his eyes barely open. But there was still life in him. Rex could feel the warmth of Mason's small body against his chest. The baby wasn't giving up, so neither would Rex. Ahead, the faint lights of the rescue center were just visible, barely glimmering through the mist and rain. They were still far away, but it was the first sign of hope Rex had seen. The lights seemed to guide him, pushing him forward even as his body begged for rest. He paddled with every last ounce of strength he had left, his body trembling with exhaustion. His paws barely touched the ground anymore. He was swimming on pure instinct. And then, finally, just when Rex felt he could swim no longer, a hand reached out. A human hand. A rescuer had seen him. The hand grabbed Rex by the collar, pulling him to the makeshift shore where the rest of the rescue teams were gathered. Rex stumbled onto the muddy bank, dragging the basin with him. The rescuers shouted in surprise as they saw the baby inside. Mason was alive. He had made it. Rex collapsed onto the wet earth, his body trembling. He was too tired to stand. Too tired to do anything but watch as the rescuers rushed forward, lifting the baby out of the basin and performing CPR. For a moment, Rex didn't care about anything except the fact that Mason was safe. He had done it. He had brought him back. But as the baby's chest rose and fell with each breath, Rex realized there was more to this story than survival. More than just saving a life. As Mason's mother arrived, her eyes wide with disbelief, Rex found the strength to lift his head. His fur was heavy with the weight of exhaustion, but his eyes met hers and something deep inside him stirred. She fell to her knees, her tears flowing freely as she reached for her son. The baby's tiny hand gripped her finger. Her eyes met Rex's, and in that moment she knew. She knew that it wasn't just fate that had brought them together. It was loyalty. It was love. And it was Rex, the dog who hadn't given up. The dog who saved her son. Rex lay there, his body still trembling, his legs sore and stiff from the relentless struggle. He had never been so exhausted in his life, yet there was something else rising inside him. Something warm, a feeling of accomplishment, of relief. He had done it. He had saved Mason. The wind howled above, the rain still heavy, but the chaos seemed distant now. For a moment there was only silence, a brief respite from the storm. The rescuers worked quickly, but Rex could hardly keep his eyes open. His chest rose and fell with each labored breath, his mind spinning in and out of consciousness. But he knew Mason was safe. That was all that mattered. The sounds of distant shouts and hurried footsteps began to fade as Rex's gaze softened. His eyes flickered toward the mother, the woman who had just witnessed her son's revival. She stood, holding Mason close, her hands trembling as she rocked him gently in her arms. The baby was still pale, but he was breathing, his tiny chest rising and falling with a steady rhythm now. Her sobs were soft, almost inaudible, but Rex could hear the gratitude in them. Rex's ears perked up as she looked down at him. Her eyes locked with his, and something unspoken passed between them, an understanding that words could never capture. She knelt down next to him, placing Mason gently on the ground beside her. She reached out, her fingers brushing against Rex's fur. "You saved him," she whispered, her voice shaking. "You saved my baby." Rex blinked, his eyes heavy, but the warmth in her voice filled him with a deep, satisfying peace. He didn't have the strength to rise, but he didn't need to. She understood. She had witnessed the bond that had driven him to fight through the storm, to save someone who wasn't even his own. Her tears fell silently as she touched his ear, the same ear that had been cut and torn from the storm's vicious embrace. She could see the marks of his struggle, the exhaustion etched into his every feature. She could see how far he had come. "You must be so tired," she murmured. "You didn't have to do this. But you did." Rex's eyes fluttered, the world around him starting to blur once more. His body was so heavy, but he kept his focus on the woman and her son. Mason. The baby was still too young to understand, but Rex could sense that he was safe now. That was enough. The rescuers had started to gather around, talking amongst themselves, their voices drowned out by the soft whisper of the storm. Some of them were looking at Rex, their faces full of disbelief. But they couldn't fully understand. They hadn't seen what Rex had seen. They hadn't felt what he had felt. Rex had been left behind. He had been abandoned when the storm hit, his family caught in the chaos of evacuation. But in his heart there was only one purpose: to save, to protect. And now he had done it. He had saved a child. A child who would never have survived without him. As Rex lay there, the rescuer in charge approached the mother, offering her a blanket to cover her and Mason. His eyes were full of respect, a newfound admiration for the dog who had done the impossible. He had been there when Rex had first appeared on the shore, carrying the baby in his mouth. There was no mistaking the sheer determination in the dog's eyes. "You're a hero," the rescuer said, crouching down beside Rex. "We've seen a lot of brave people out here today, but you're something special." Rex let out a small, weak growl, not from aggression but from a deep, contented sense of accomplishment. He had done his job. He had fulfilled his purpose. The mother, still holding Mason, looked down at him, her expression softening. She stood up, her body still trembling but now with gratitude. She approached the group of rescuers, her gaze never leaving Rex. The moment she reached them, she hesitated for a second, as if processing everything that had just happened. She turned back to Rex, her eyes filled with emotion. "Thank you," she said, her voice filled with the weight of 1,000 unsaid words. "I don't know how you did it, but you saved him. You saved my Mason." Rex lifted his head slightly, his eyes locking with hers again. She nodded, her tears spilling freely. She understood what he had done. Rex hadn't just saved Mason from the storm. He had fought through his own fear, his exhaustion, to reach the child, to carry him through the flood and deliver him to safety. She bent down and without hesitation she reached out to him. Her fingers brushed against Rex's soaked fur, gently caressing the dog who had just saved everything she had left. She whispered softly, "You're not just a dog. You're part of our family now." The storm still raged on above them, but it felt as if time had slowed. The darkness of the floodwaters, the storm that had torn apart everything in its path, seemed to fade into the background. For a brief moment, there was only Rex, the baby, and the woman who would never forget the dog who had brought her child back to life. Rex felt a warmth spread through his body as she spoke. He wasn't sure what would come next. Would he be reunited with his own family? Would the storm ever truly end? But none of that mattered right now. What mattered was that Mason was alive. And that Mason's mother had found him again. The rescuers were still working, coordinating efforts to bring everyone to safety. But Rex could barely hear them now. His attention was fixed on the woman and her baby, who was now clinging to her chest, safe and sound. As she knelt down beside him, Rex's weary eyes closed, and for the first time in what felt like forever, he allowed himself to rest. His breathing slowed as he felt her hand on his head, gentle and loving. She spoke again, her voice quiet but filled with certainty. "You saved him. And now I'm going to make sure you're safe too. You'll always have a place with us." Rex's tail flicked weakly behind him, a silent acknowledgement of her promise. As he drifted into a peaceful sleep, his mind finally at ease, he knew one thing. He had done what he was meant to do. Mason was safe. and for Rex that was enough. The morning after the storm arrived with an eerie stillness, a calm that felt almost unnatural after the chaos of the night. The wind had died down, but the floodwaters remained, leaving the town in ruins. Everything around them was a blurred mess of debris, overturned cars and broken pieces of homes. But in this silent aftermath there was hope. Rex had fallen into a deep sleep by the time the rescuers began their work. His tired body finally found the peace it had longed for, the exhaustion from his harrowing swim taking over. It wasn't until the first rays of sunlight peeked through the broken clouds that he began to stir. His body felt sore, his muscles still aching from the hours he had spent in the water, struggling against the waves, carrying Mason to safety. But now the pain seemed distant. He slowly raised his head, blinking his eyes open to the world that had changed overnight. The storm had passed, but the devastation was still all around him. The mother, Alina, was sitting nearby watching over Mason, who was now wrapped in a thick blanket, his tiny body still recovering from the shock. She was gazing at Rex with a look of deep gratitude in her eyes. He could see the way she kept glancing at him, as if trying to make sense of the miracle that had unfolded the night before. Rex knew what she was thinking. She had lost everything in the storm, including her own sense of security. But somehow she had found a protector in the form of a dog who had been left behind, abandoned in the chaos, yet still willing to fight for a life that wasn't his own. As the rescuers moved around, gathering survivors and coordinating the recovery efforts, Rex pushed himself up, his legs shaking as he stood. The pain in his joints made him wince, but there was no time for hesitation. He couldn't rest just yet. There was still something he needed to do. Alina looked up as she saw him stir, her face softening with concern. "Rex," she called out, her voice quiet but full of warmth. She slowly stood up, still holding Mason close. She was hesitant, as if unsure whether to approach the dog that had just saved her son. But Rex was already moving toward her, his steps slow but determined. Rex's eyes locked onto hers as he limped over. His body felt like it had been through a war, but he kept going. She knelt down when he reached her, gently reaching out to touch his battered fur. Her fingers trembled slightly as they made contact with his coat, but Rex felt the comfort in her touch. It wasn't just out of gratitude, it was something more. A bond had formed between them, a connection that transcended the words she had spoken. He had saved her son, but in that act he had also saved something inside her. A piece of her hope, a piece of her faith in the world. "Thank you," Alina whispered, her voice thick with emotion. She leaned down, resting her forehead against Rex's. The touch was gentle, a soft promise that she would never forget the sacrifice he had made. Rex's tail gave a weak wag, a small but meaningful gesture of reassurance. He didn't need words to understand what she was saying. He could feel it in the way she held him, in the way her hands caressed his tired body. After a moment she pulled back, her eyes searching his face. "You've been through so much," she said softly, her voice trembling. "I don't know how to thank you enough." Rex simply looked at her, his gaze steady and unwavering. He had done what he was meant to do. Nothing more, nothing less. But Alina wasn't finished yet. She glanced around, taking in the devastation once more. The streets were filled with survivors and emergency personnel. Some were searching for loved ones, while others were directing traffic or setting up makeshift shelters. It was all so chaotic, so uncertain. And yet, in the middle of it all, she felt a strange sense of calm. She knew that, no matter how much had been lost, Mason was alive. And Rex had made that possible. "I lost everything," she said quietly, her voice distant as she stared at the wreckage around them. "I thought I had lost him too." She looked back down at Mason, who was now resting peacefully in her arms. His tiny chest rose and fell steadily, a sign that he was finally out of danger. "But you saved him." Rex took a step back, his eyes fixed on the baby. Mason's little face was still pale, but his breathing was steady. Rex had done his part, he had brought him to safety. But it wasn't just about Mason. It was about the promise that Rex had kept to himself all these years. To protect, to save, no matter what the cost. Alina wiped the tears from her eyes, her fingers trembling. She looked up at Rex once more, her expression softening with an overwhelming sense of gratitude. "I don't know how I can ever repay you for this," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "But I promise you this, you'll always have a place with us." Rex nodded, the weight of her words sinking in. He wasn't sure what the future held, but he knew that in this moment he had fulfilled his purpose. He had saved a life. A child's life. And that was enough. As Alina stood up, she cradled Mason gently in her arms, walking slowly toward the group of rescuers. Rex followed, his movements slow but determined. He could feel his strength returning bit by bit. The worst of the storm was over, but the journey wasn't finished yet. There were still more lives to be saved, more families to be reunited. And Rex was ready for whatever came next. The storm was behind them, but the aftermath was far from over. The floodwaters still covered the streets, and the damage was devastating. But Rex was no longer focused on the wreckage. His focus was on the baby in Alina's arms, and the promise he had made, a promise to protect, to keep moving forward. As Alina and Rex made their way through the debris-filled streets, the full extent of the devastation became clearer. The town had been torn apart by the hurricane, and the once familiar surroundings now felt like a different world altogether. It was hard to tell where the streets ended and where the floodwaters began. Broken tree branches, discarded furniture, and other remnants of people's lives floated by, carried by the current. Rex's paws squelched in the water, his fur still heavy from the soaking it had taken the previous night. His muscles were sore from the constant swimming, the strain of carrying Mason through the flood, but the weight of exhaustion couldn't stop him. His mind was fixed on one thing. He needed to ensure that Mason was safe. That was his duty now that they passed by other survivors, some huddled in groups, others walking in stunned silence, unsure of what to do next. There were rescue teams, too, working tirelessly to pull people from the floodwaters, offering blankets and food, and trying to restore some semblance of order in the chaos. But in the midst of it all, there was one thing that stood out: the bond between a dog and the family he had saved. It was something no one could deny. Rex wasn't just a dog. He was a hero, the symbol of survival and hope in the face of unimaginable loss. Alina glanced down at Rex as they walked, her heart swelling with emotion. She could feel the dog's determination, his resolve to keep going, even though he had already done more than enough. He had saved her son. He had defied the odds and brought Mason back when no one else could. And now, despite the storm being over, Rex wasn't stopping. He was still by their side, still guiding them through the wreckage. "Thank you," she whispered to him, her voice barely audible over the sound of the rescue operations around them. She wasn't sure if Rex could understand the depth of her gratitude, but she needed him to know that she wouldn't forget what he had done. "You're not just a dog, you're a lifeline." Rex looked up at her, his eyes steady and unwavering. He didn't need words to understand. The trust between them was enough. The journey through the wreckage felt endless. Every corner they turned seemed to present another obstacle: flooded intersections, fallen trees, abandoned vehicles. But Rex kept moving forward, his powerful body cutting through the water like a force of nature. His determination was unwavering, and though the streets were unrecognizable, Rex knew the way. He had navigated this town with his family countless times before. He knew where to go, even if everything else had changed. As they moved deeper into the heart of the town, the storm's aftermath began to take a different shape. Where the water had once been chaotic, it was now calm, but the destruction it had left behind was evident. Homes had been flattened, entire blocks had been submerged, and the air was thick with the smell of damp earth and debris. Alina paused for a moment to catch her breath, her arms cradling Mason tightly as she gazed at the wreckage. She could see the floodwater marks on the buildings, the higher levels where the water had reached before slowly receding. She didn't know where to begin, how to start rebuilding. The thought of facing the future alone without her family felt overwhelming. But then she looked at Rex, and a sense of reassurance washed over her. He had brought her son back. He had defied every expectation, and in doing so, he had saved more than just Mason's life. He had given Alina hope when she had lost it all. "Rex," she whispered again, the words thick with emotion. "I don't know what I would have done without you." Rex stopped and turned to look at her, his ears pricked up, his eyes focused and alert. He wasn't just a dog to her anymore. He was a partner, a protector, a symbol of survival. And that meant everything in a world that had been torn apart by the storm. Alina smiled through her tears. She wasn't sure where the road ahead would lead, but for the first time since the storm had hit, she felt a glimmer of something like hope. Rex nudged her gently, his nose pressing against her hand. The simple gesture spoke volumes. He wasn't just there to save Mason. He was there to help her through this too. And that was something no one could have prepared for. The bond between them wasn't just about survival. It was about something deeper, something that couldn't be broken by the storm or the challenges ahead. As they walked on, the sound of the rescue teams grew louder, and the sight of their makeshift shelters and recovery stations reminded them that help was on the way. People were starting to regroup, to begin the hard process of rebuilding their lives. But Rex and Alina knew that it wouldn't be easy. There would be more pain, more loss to come. Yet, there was something undeniable about the way the dog had acted. He had proven that survival wasn't just about brute strength. It was about love, loyalty, and the willingness to keep going no matter the odds. The path was still long and the journey far from over, but Rex had already accomplished something incredible. He had saved a life. He had become more than a dog, he had become a symbol of what it meant to never give up, even when the world around you seemed lost. And for Alina and Mason, that was all they needed to take the first step forward. Together. The rain had stopped, but the skies remained heavy with dark clouds, casting a somber tone over the town. The once busy streets, where children played and cars passed by, were now eerily silent. The sound of helicopters overhead and the occasional shout of rescue workers calling for survivors echoed through the empty spaces. Rex's fur, once thick and healthy, was matted with mud and debris. His muscles were sore, his body trembling with exhaustion. He had pushed through the worst of the storm, swum through flooded streets, carried a baby against the current, and now he was here walking beside Alina and Mason, still with the same steady resolve. His eyes remained sharp, alert, scanning their surroundings for any threats or dangers. He was a protector by nature and nothing would change that. Alina's arms were aching from holding Mason, but her heart was lighter. She had the child she thought she'd lost, and with Rex by her side, it felt like they might actually make it through this ordeal. But the hardest part wasn't over. There was still so much uncertainty, so many unknowns. Where would they go? Who would help them rebuild their lives? And most of all, how could she ever repay Rex for what he had done? The thought weighed heavily on her. She had no answers, but for now she held on to the only thing that mattered. She had her son and she had the dog who had saved him. Together they had already been through so much. As they walked deeper into the flooded town, the rescue efforts seemed to intensify. The streets were lined with makeshift shelters and people had started to gather, some comforting each other, others searching through piles of rubble, looking for anything of value. The devastation was everywhere. Homes, businesses, memories, gone in an instant. The storm had left nothing untouched. Alina spotted a group of rescue workers near what used to be a local pharmacy. They were pulling people from the wreckage and assessing injuries. Her heart leapt with hope. Maybe, just maybe, they could help her figure out where to go next. She quickened her pace, but Rex didn't follow. The dog stood still, his eyes locked onto the group of workers, his body tense. He was watching, waiting, analyzing. "Rex, come on," Alina called softly, but the dog didn't budge. Rex's gaze never wavered. He was scanning the crowd with an intensity that Alina had come to recognize. Something wasn't right. And when he started moving again, it wasn't toward the workers. It was toward something else. A flicker of recognition sparked in his eyes. Alina was confused for a moment, but then it hit her. The dog was on a mission again. His instincts, so finely honed after years of service, had never been sharper. He wasn't just leading them, he was searching for something. "Rex, wait," she called, but the dog was already moving fast. He weaved through the debris, his paws splashing through the flooded streets, until he reached the edge of the wreckage. Alina hesitated. She wasn't sure where Rex was going, but she trusted him. Her heart raced as she followed, her mind scrambling to keep up with the dog's movements. What was he sensing? Suddenly Rex stopped. His head was held high, his ears alert. He was tracking something, his nose twitching in the air, picking up a scent. Alina felt a knot form in her stomach as she watched him, wondering what he had found this time. It was then that she saw it, a faint outline in the distance, barely visible through the mist and debris. A shadow against the wreckage. Something, or someone, was there. Rex trotted toward the figure with determination. Alina's heart skipped a beat. Who could it be? A survivor? Someone who had been trapped in the rubble? Her mind raced with possibilities. When Rex reached the figure, he stopped abruptly and stood still, his body poised, his eyes focused intently. Alina caught up to him, her breath coming in short gasps. She saw the figure now, a man, his clothes torn, his face smeared with dirt and ash. He was slumped against the wreckage of what had once been a car, unconscious but still breathing. Alina crouched beside him, her hands trembling as she checked for signs of life. He was alive but barely. His pulse was weak, his body cold and clammy. The man had clearly been trapped in the storm and had somehow made it through the worst of it, but now he needed help. Call for help. Alina shouted to the nearest rescue team, but no one seemed to hear her over the din of helicopters and shouts from other survivors. She knew they wouldn't make it in time. She had to do something. And Rex, once again, had led her to him. Rex stood by, his eyes never leaving the man. He wasn't just standing guard, he was waiting for Alina to act, to make the decision. His presence, calm and unwavering, was a constant reminder of the loyalty and determination that had driven him from the very beginning. Alina looked back at the man, her heart pounding in her chest. She had to make a choice. Should she stay with this stranger and hope that help would arrive, or should she keep moving with Mason, continuing the search for a safe place? There was no time to waste. Rex's presence made her decision. He had never faltered in his loyalty, never left her side when things were darkest. It was time to return the favor. "Let's get him to safety," Alina said quietly, her voice steady despite the chaos around them. She gently lifted the man's arm over her shoulder, doing her best to support his weight. Rex followed, his pace slow and deliberate as he stayed close by. Together, the trio moved forward through the wreckage, Rex's quiet strength guiding them. The rescue workers didn't understand what they were seeing at first. From behind the twisted wreckage of an overturned fishing boat, a muddy figure emerged, for legs, powerful shoulders, soaked fur clinging to his body like armor. In his jaws, cradled carefully, was a round plastic basin, battered but intact. Inside the basin lay a baby. Pale, limp, silent. Gasps rang out. Two medics dropped their stretchers and rushed forward as Rex carefully lowered the basin onto the nearest dry patch of pavement. His chest heaved from exhaustion. His paws trembled beneath him. But his eyes never left the child. "Dear God," one of the responders whispered, already reaching into the basin. "Is he alive?" a woman cried out. Alina pushed through the gathering crowd, her eyes wide with panic. "Let me through. Please," she shouted. She shoved past arms and bodies until she reached the edge of the circle, and then she saw him. Mason. Her knees buckled. She fell to the ground with a broken sob, clutching her mouth with shaking hands. "No. No, oh my God, that's my baby. That's Mason." The medics were already at work. They laid Mason flat on a clean tarp, checked his breathing, his pulse. One began chest compressions, counting under his breath. Another grabbed an oxygen mask from the emergency kit. The wind howled around them, but the world felt unnaturally still. Alina crawled toward them, tears streaming down her face. She couldn't stop shaking. Rex sat beside her, unmoving, eyes fixed on the boy he had carried through wind, water, and death itself. "Mason baby, come on," Alina whispered, her voice raw. "Please, please breathe." The medic called out, "He's got a faint pulse." They all paused. Then suddenly, a cough. A small, sputtering cough. The sound was soft, but it cracked the silence like thunder. Mason's body twitched, water spilling from his lips. His chest began to rise and fall. Shallow, uneven breaths, but breaths nonetheless. Alina let out a cry that sounded like it had been torn from the deepest part of her soul. She reached for him, her hands trembling as she touched his tiny hand, still soaked and cold. "Mason, mommy's here. I'm here, baby. You're okay. You're okay." Mason's eyelids fluttered open just for a second. He looked up, dazed and barely conscious. But he saw her. And she saw him. The medic stepped back slightly. "We need to keep him warm. He's severely hypothermic, but he's going to make it." Alina broke down completely, sobbing against her son's tiny body. All the fear, the guilt, the desperation, it poured out in one release. Her baby was alive. He was here. And it was because of that dog. She turned to Rex. He was still sitting there, tail still, body slumped, as if all the strength that had carried him through the storm had drained the moment he knew the child was safe. His eyes met hers, and for the first time, Alina saw something more than intelligence behind them. She saw grief. And a kind of mourning that only a soul with loss could understand. She crawled toward him, wrapping her arms around his soaked, mud-streaked neck. "You saved my son," she whispered into his fur. "You brought him back to me." The crowd around them stood in silence, watching something they couldn't quite explain. A dog, no leash, no collar, had come out of a flood, carrying a child who would have drowned without him. He hadn't done it for treats or praise. He had done it because something deep inside told him it was the right thing to do. "What's his name?" someone asked. Alina looked up at the medics, the crowd. I don't know. He's not mine." "He came in alone?" a rescuer said, astonished. "No handler? No owner?" The medic nodded. "He found us. We didn't find him." A moment passed. Then someone in the crowd muttered, "He must have gotten separated during the storm." "He should be with his family," another said quietly. Alina looked back at Rex. Or maybe he already lost them. The realization dawned on her. That scar on his ear, the way he never barked, only watched. The pain in his eyes. He had no one left. Her throat tightened. She looked at Mason, now wrapped in a warm blanket, breathing slowly. Then she looked back at Rex, who had begun to lay down, his energy finally giving way to fatigue. "I don't care where he came from," Alina said softly. "He's family now." The medics nodded, a quiet reverence in their faces. One of them knelt beside Rex, placing a warm towel over his back. "He's a hero," the medic said. "No," Alina replied, tears in her voice. "He's more than that." She leaned forward and kissed the top of Rex's head. "He's our miracle." As emergency crews gathered around, preparing to transport the survivors to the nearest relief shelter, Alina remained by Rex's side. Mason, now in her arms again, began to stir gently. His tiny hand reached out and landed on Rex's paw. The dog flinched slightly, then looked up. And for the first time, something in Rex softened. He let out a low, tired huff and placed his head gently on Mason's blanket-covered legs. That night, as the shelters filled and the news began to spread of the storm dog who saved a baby, people whispered stories of Rex, a name they'd learn later, and how he'd emerged from the flood. Not with his own family, but with a life in his jaws that wasn't his to protect. But he had protected it anyway. The rain had stopped. A soft wind moved gently through the trees, rustling their leaves with the kind of quiet that only comes after something terrible has passed. The sun peeked out between broken clouds, its rays scattering over the muddy ground, illuminating the aftermath, but also the beginning of something new. At the shelter camp, people were rebuilding. Tents lined the field. Volunteers handed out food and blankets. Families reunited, hugging through tears, thankful just to be breathing. And in the far corner of the camp, on a cot placed beside Alina's, lay Rex. His wounds had been cleaned. His body was still weak, but his spirit had started to return. The shelter vet had stitched up his ear, bandaged his paws, and whispered gently, "You're not just a good boy. You're the best boy." Alina sat nearby with Mason curled in her lap, feeding him warm milk from a bottle. Every now and then, the boy glanced over at Rex, as if checking that he was still there, that he hadn't vanished like the storm. "Can you believe it?" a volunteer said as she passed by. "That dog carried him for miles, through flooded streets, over debris. I don't know how he even knew where we were." "I think he just followed his heart," Alina replied, gently stroking Mason's curls. "He didn't run from the storm. He ran into it." Across the field, a TV crew had arrived. The story had spread across the region: hero dog rescues baby from storm. But every time they asked for a name, Alina simply said, "He didn't have one, until now." She stood and walked to the edge of the cot. Rex looked up at her with those deep, intelligent eyes that had seen war, loss, abandonment, and still chose to save a stranger. Alina knelt beside him, placing a gentle hand on his neck. "I don't know what you lost," she said softly, "but I know what you found." She motioned toward Mason, now giggling softly under the rising sun. "You found us, and we're not letting you go." Rex let out a quiet breath. He nudged his head under her hand, closing his eyes as if, for the first time in a long time, he felt safe. Alina smiled. "We're going home. All of us." Weeks later, in a quiet neighborhood far from the coast, a red raincoat hung on a door hook, dry at last. Toys littered the living room. Mason crawled across the floor, chasing a plush dog toy in delight. And in the sunlight pouring through the window, Rex rested on a soft rug, head raised, ears perked. He was no longer just a survivor. No longer the nameless dog lost in the flood. He had a collar now, a warm bed, a home, and a name engraved in bold letters on a silver tag, REX. Alina knelt beside him, holding Mason in her arms. "You didn't save your own family in that storm," she whispered, her voice catching, "but you found us. And you became ours." Rex turned his head, licking Mason's hand. The baby squealed with joy and leaned forward, wrapping tiny arms around the dog's neck. Rex closed his eyes. For the first time in his life, not just safety, not just survival, but peace and love. A family that would never leave him behind. If this story moved you, don't let it end here. Pawprints, share it with someone who believes in second chances. Red Heart, because sometimes heroes don't wear capes. They walk on four legs. Mobile phone with arrow, like, comment, and follow for more real stories that prove loyalty, love, and courage still exist, even in the darkest storms.